This screencast supports this lesson, which is Unit 6 of Cutting Edge Elementary, and that's by Sarah Cunningham and Peter Moore and Araminta Crace, C-R-A-C-E, published by Pearson. And you're going to need a few things for this 2-hour lesson. We've got this page of the student's book, and this page, which has a very nice reading on it. And you've got the teacher's book notes. There are several pages of this. It does cover the whole unit, so you'll have to look around for the piece that refers to your part of the lesson. At the back of the book, there's a useful study, practice, remember section, which I find is really useful for the grammar analysis. And there's also some additional controlled practice and some things that you need to remember. So it's useful information. Most of it is repeated in the teacher's book notes, but it's worth having a look at. And there are two more things. One is this communication activity, which is part of the lesson, and the other thing is an audio file. Okay. So if we think about an overview of the lesson, there's some vocabulary focusing on countable and uncountable nouns. The grammar focus is on use of some and any, and there's plenty of practice here as well. There's no skills involved in this first part of the lesson. However, there is a reading on the next page, and I think that's how we're going to start the lesson. Start with the reading and then come back to look at this page. So here's the reading. It's a great topic, different diets from around the world. Interesting thing to talk about and to read about. Hopefully the reading will be at the right level for your learners. If you think it's a bit too difficult, you can always take out one of the texts and adjust the tasks accordingly. Whenever you look at a reading text in a book, you've got to think, right, what are the stages of a reading skills lesson, and are they all here in the book? Are they going to work? So a reading skills lesson needs to start off with some creating interest, raising interest and background knowledge about the topic. Then you might need to pre-teach any blocking vocabulary that's going to stop the students from being able to do the tasks. And then you need a simple first task and a more complex second task. If there's a bit of prediction work in it, all well and good. That's a really useful skill to practice. So let's take a look at this piece of material and see what is there and what we might have to add or change. So exercise 1, look at the photos and discuss the questions. Which countries and what kind of food? That looks like raising interest to me, so I think that's very useful. Then you might need to pre-teach some vocabulary. There's nothing here that is doing that. So have a look at the texts and the tasks and think, right, are there any words here that I think that my students will not know, and it's going to hold them up in doing this task? Okay, the thing that's just jumping out at me is large amounts in this task here. And maybe vegetarian, just to clarify that, and possibly spices. Okay. And when I look in the text as well, I can see small portions, which they might need to know in order to answer question number 7. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm looking at the questions and then looking at the texts and trying to pre-teach the words that are in the text and the questions. Of course, you could just reword the questions if you don't want to focus on those parts. All right, but that's the second task. So is there a nice easy initial task? Ah, yes, there's a prediction. So they talk about these questions here and then they read to check their answers. Very nice. Okay, so I suggest you do exercise 1. And then elicit some of their answers and maybe even put them on a board or a slide so they've got something visual to look back at. And then you can say, right, now I want you to read the text and see whether the ideas that we put on the board are in the text or not. Then you want to give them a time limit to read. You don't want them to dawdle. You want this to be quite a quick reading. Rule of thumb that I use is I look at a text, I read it to myself time it at a reasonable pace and then double it for the student. So if this took me 2 minutes to read, then I'd give the students 4 minutes. You get the idea. So they read, answer the question, and then get them to check together, to talk together about their answers, either a quick visit to a breakout room or talking together. Peer checking is always a good idea before feedback stages. Raises confidence, makes people feel better about their answers, and encourages some peer teaching. Also allows you to monitor and work out where the difficulties have lain. Now there's a second task that's more complex. Yep, that seems fine. So again, set the task clearly. Give them a time limit to read, a bit longer this time because it requires more careful reading. And at the end of that time limit, put them into breakout rooms or pairs or get them to talk together again about their answers so that you can monitor and listen and assess where problems have come up. Then you need a section to give feedback on those answers and make it visual, please. Don't just roll through it orally. They will get lost, and then you'll get to the end and people will be saying, oh, what about number 3? Okay, so make it visual in some way. To round it off at the end, there's this brief discussion task here, which can provide a nice little way of wrapping up the reading before we segue into the next part of the lesson. So the next part of the lesson is going to focus on countable and uncountable nouns. Okay, quite an important part of the grammar of Lexis in English, as I'm sure you know. First of all, we want them to identify these food items. So I would say just put the picture on a slide, say talk together, what are these? And you could even number them and then say write the answer, type the answer in the chat box, and that gets everybody thinking, looking and writing. And if you put the numbers in there, it makes it easier to do the feedback. And that'll check the student's spelling a little bit as well, which is always helpful. At the end of that, I'd say it would be a good idea to check any spelling mistakes that have arisen and to do some drilling of the difficult items. Things that jump out at me are biscuits, a tricky word to say. Orange is not orange, so that could be a useful one as well, as it is salad, as in it's got a and then in the second part. So choose some items to drill. You don't need to do all of them. Do the ones that are a bit trickier, and then there'll be a real purpose to it. Okay, then we're matching the words with the photos, but it sounds like you've probably already done that in the first stage. And then it's time to get into the difference between countable nouns and uncountable nouns. So I think this is best done perhaps with some realia. If you've got some grapes or tomatoes, you can hold them up and say, well, can I count these? Yes, 1 tomato, 2 tomatoes. And then you can say, what about grapes? Can I count those? What about eggs? Can I count those? And point out the fact that when you have 1, it is a or an. And when you have many, then you put an S on the end. Okay, so pointing out the form features of countable nouns. Do the same with the other nouns. So hold up some rice and say, can I count this? Oh, no, I can't. Can I say a rice? Rices? No, I can't. They are uncountable. Okay, now danger here is that some of these nouns are countable and uncountable. Chickens, when they're alive and running around, they're countable. 1, 2, 3, 4 chickens. But chicken as a foodstuff is uncountable. Coffee has changed over the years. We never used to be able to say a coffee, 2 coffees, and now we do. So things are changing. You'll find the teacher's book notes useful about this and the grammar reference as well, but just keep it nice and simple and clarify the difference between the 2 types. When you think the students have got it, then let them do this task of putting these words into the correct columns. I think doing this with a partner or in a group of 3 in a breakout room is great because then they can help each other. There are other things you can do, like you could use a word wall task. So on the website Word Wall, if you sign up for that, you can find different things that can make 2 different groups of things. Okay, so there are other sites where you can find activities to do this, or simply have the students do it together and write them down. We've already done some drilling, but you might do a bit more here if you fancy. And then I think working again in pairs or groups, adding 3 more words to each column from their own knowledge and checking the answers to that. That would be really useful. Now it's time to move on to the grammar focus of there is and there are, okay, over here. So first of all, there's an audio. They listen to 8 sentences about the photos. So they need to be looking at the pictures, listening to the sentences and deciding if they are true or false. If you don't fancy using the audio, if it's a bit too much to be sharing the audio, particularly if you're in an online situation, then you can simply read these out, okay, and the students decide if they are true or false. Okay, and these sentences then form the context for clarifying the rules, which is here. Now, it's a great idea if the students aren't just told the rules, but they have to work it out for themselves. And in this red grammar box is an activity that does that quite well, I think. Okay, so if you get the students looking at the 8 sentences and then choosing the right answers here. Is it there is or there are? Okay, here. Is it some or any? Here. I think you could expand that to include the questions as well and have some examples of the questions and ask the students whether you use some or any rather than just telling them. Okay, and this is an opportunity for the students to talk together to see what they know, to see what they can already work out together. Okay, so really useful done as a whole group, but with everybody talking, or in breakout rooms of 2 or 3 people talking together. Once they've talked about what they think the answers are, then it's time for you to come in and clarify. Okay, so you come back in, check the answers to this, and then do some further checking. So saying, so when it's a positive sentence, do we use some or any? When it's a negative sentence, what do we use? When it's a question, what do we use? Countable nouns, is or are. So lots of checking that the students have got the key points of difference here. Okay, if we think about meaning, form, pronunciation, appropriacy, MFPA, then the meaning's been clarified through the pictures and the sentences. The form we've just looked at. So pronunciation, it might be a good idea to drill a few sentences just to get the linking working well. Okay, and you can orally drill that with the students. And then it's time for some practice. Have they got it? Do they know the rules? So number 1, put it up on the screen, elicit an example. What goes in number 1? Is it any or some? And then why? Why is it some? Why is it any? Okay. Then give them time to work alone to do the other ones. And then checking in a breakout room whether they've got the same answers or checking as a group together before feedback from you and more checking. Why is it any? Why is it some? Why is it there is? Etc. Further practice, let's make it a little bit more difficult now than a simple gap fill. Writing sentences about the pictures. You can stick with those original pictures or give some new ones if you want at this stage. And the students write down 4 sentences, perhaps 4 sentences true, 4 sentences false, or 2 of each, whatever you choose to do. And give them time to do that, and then they say them out loud and the other person says whether they're true or false. Needs some clear modelling and demonstration for this part of the lesson. The instructions are going to be more complex than exercise 1, so really think about how you're going to set it up. The final task is based on the picture of the picnic that I showed you at the beginning from page 135. You show them the picture and then they have to remember what was on it. Okay, the picture itself has got the words are on, so you might want to take those off and challenge the students to retrieve the words as well. I think this is pretty good, done exactly as it is. Again, it's going to need a nice clear model, or as an alternative, if you don't want to get into the question form, you can show them the picture and then they have to write sentences. There is some da-da-da, there are some da-da-da, and then you can show them the picture, and with great hilarity everybody goes, oh, I thought there was lots of oil but there isn't, there's a cabbage instead, or something like that. Okay, and doing some correction at the end. So that wraps up the lesson there. It's a really nice idea to finish up with this last question. What kind of foods do you like to have on a picnic? Just to round off the lesson with a bit of speaking. I think that would be a good way to end.